Jasmine didn't know why she was about to walk out on stage. She just wanted to get it over with. The whole day had been a slow walk through a brightly lit nightmare. Even now, adjusting the straps on her silk bikini, she felt as if she were floating. The advent of the giant ships had plunged the entire globe into a deep state of confusion. Some believed they were the black angels of the apocalypse come to drown God's green earth in flood, famine, and fire. Others anticipated a beatific ceremony announcing intergalactic harmony and cooperation. While many were scrambling desperately to escape the city, others, like the man who owned a shoe store at the base of Jasmine's Hill, were keeping to their regular schedules. All the rhythms of the workaday world, the infinite number of small routines which had seemed so real the day before, turned out to be no more solid than reflections on the surface of still water. The arrival of the ships dropped a large stone into the center of the pond, turning daily life into a rippling, distorted dream. Robbed of its rules, the world didn't know how to behave. The only reason she'd gone into work was to pick up her paycheck. It was supposed to be a 15-minute stop on her way down to El Toro, but then she'd run into Mario. 50, expensively tailored, hair slicked straight back, a notorious name-dropper. He was the very picture of a middle-aged mafioso wannabe. His club, the Seven Veils, was all he had in the world, and his reaction to the crisis was to insist that the show must go on. Many people over the years had accused him of being a vampire, draining the life out of his girls, sucking every nickel from their bodies before tossing them out for dead. When Jasmine came in for her paycheck, he begged, cajoled, and threatened until she agreed to perform that night. If her head had been clear, she would have laughed in his face, told him where to shove it, and disappeared. But no one's head was clear. After all, what if the ships turned around and left? What if Steve decided a woman with a checkered past and a 6-year-old son were more than what he'd wanted to handle? Where else was she going to find a job that let her choose her hours and paid her so generously? She desperately wanted to believe Steve wasn't going to let her down and was fairly certain he wouldn't. But she and Dylan had had the rug pulled from under them before, and Jasmine was nothing if not protective of her son. Mario took full advantage of her history while trying to convince her to stay and work. He'd known Jasmine for a long time, knew all about her life before Dylan in her native Alabama. She'd started dancing in some podunk club in Nowheresville before being discovered and brought to Mobile. That's where Mario had found her. One night after a show, he bought her a drink and listened sympathetically to her entire life story, then convinced her to head out west, where she could put her past behind her, start over, and make some very serious money. The good thing about Mario was that he never tried to get her into bed. He maintained a professional relationship with Jasmine and respected her work ethic. She showed up on time, steered clear of the drugs most of the girls took, and never dated the customers. The bad thing about him was that he knew all the right buttons to push when he wanted something out of her. That's exactly what he'd done when she walked in asking for her paycheck. He reminded her of the men she'd trusted, including the one who had left her with a child and no way to support herself. When he figured she was feeling vulnerable, he switched gears and threatened to fire her if she wouldn't help him keep the club open. A pathetic tyrant desperate to keep control over his little fiefdom. The thumping bass line of her song pulsed over the club's sound system, and the announcer's tape voice boomed over the top. "Gentlemen, loosen your collars and get ready for something extremely hot. Put your hands together for the lovely Sabrina." Suddenly, Sabrina's tigress in heat expression disappeared. There was no one in the audience. The 100 chairs surrounding the stage were all empty. The only customers were a handful of men clustered around the big screen TV at the far end of the room. All of them were regulars who had neither homes to defend nor families to rescue. guys who had wandered over to the Southern Vales for the same reason they always did: the company. 4 or 5 of the other dancers sat with them at the bar watching the news. Without a doubt, it was the worst moment of Jasmine's career as a stripper. She suddenly felt very angry and very stupid, standing there, nearly naked, in the blazing stage lights. She began to realize why she had really come to the club. She had wanted Mario to confirm all her suspicions about Steve, to remind her of her failures with men, or, more exactly, all of the men who had failed her. After all, hadn't he taken off, leaving her in Dillon when the spaceship appeared? But what really made her angry was that she had kept Dillon with her, exposing him to danger unnecessarily. It was time to drive like hell down to El Toro and see whether Steve was for real. She slipped out of her high heels and, unnoticed, walked back through the tacky foil curtains. She came into the dressing room cussing mad. "I can't believe I let that son of a dog talk me into this. I only came here to get my check. What was I thinking?" She collapsed into the chair in front of her dressing table, wiping off her stage makeup in disgust. At the next table, a washed-out girl of 19 or 20 sat staring at her portable television set. "Can you even believe what is going on? It is so totally cool." She called herself Tiffany. She had a long, graceful body, enormous boobs, and armfuls of straight, black hair pinned haphazardly atop her head. Lighting a fresh cigarette with the butt of another, she spoke in a slow, spacey voice. "I told you they were out there, and you thought I was nuts." On the television screen between static interruptions, a pair of newscasters with serious expressions were reading the news. "This next story comes from the It Could Only Happen in California file. Hundreds of UFO fanatics have congregated on the rooftops of several skyscrapers in downtown Los Angeles. Soon after the craft parked at 10 a.m. yesterday with its centered position directly above the old First Interstate building, sign-toting individuals made their way to the rooftops, apparently to welcome the ship's occupants. Gordy Compton is live and on the scene in the Nose for News camcopter." The screen cut to an unsteady helicopter shot, its powerful search beam like a shaft of lightning in the night sky, swooping over the crown of the LA skyline, the First Interstate building. Crowded onto the helipad atop the building were 50 or 60 people. When the light hit them, they went mad, shouting and waving hand-painted signs. Some held up signs like, "Take me," and "Experiment on me." "Oh, signs. I forgot," Tiffany remembered. "Look at the one I made." She reached into a shopping bag and took out the side of a cardboard box. In loppy, girlish letters were the words, "We come in peace," and a crayon drawing of a space alien. Jasmine gripped Tiffany's arms. "Don't even dare," she hissed. "Girl, listen to me. You're not thinking about joining those idiots, are you?" Tiffany rolled her eyes and blew smoke at the ceiling. "I'm going over there as soon as I'm off work," she admitted. "Wanna come?" "Look at me." Jasmine took hold of Tiffany's chin and lifted it until they were eye to eye. Like most of the dancers who worked there, Tiffany was a mental and emotional basket case. She had a drug habit, plus an addiction to abusive men. As soon as they'd met, Jazz had taken the girl under her wing. "Tiffany, I don't want you going up there," Jasmine continued. "Promise me you won't." A pair of puppy dog eyes looked back until Jasmine snapped, "Promise me!" "Oh, all right, I promise," Tiffany pouted, tossing the cardboard sign over her shoulder and onto the floor. "Thank you. Look, I'm going out of town for a while, and I need you to stay out of trouble until I get back." Jasmine checked her watch. Steve was probably starting to wonder where she was. She didn't want to leave Tiffany, but she had to get on the road. She had changed into her street clothes when Mario barged into the dressing room, headed for his office. He pulled the door open and stared into the room. "What the hell is this kid doing in my office?" he bellowed. "And why is there a damn dog in here?" Dylan was inside watching a video on Mario's set. Jasmine pushed past Mario and gathered her son up in her arms. "How many times I gotta tell you damn broads? No kids at the club." "You try finding a babysitter today," Jasmine shot back, grabbing her bag with her free hand and headed toward the exit. "Whoa! Stop right there, young lady. Where do you think you're going? You promised me you were gonna work today. You leave, you're fired." Jasmine paused for a moment at the door, glancing back for a last look around. "Nice working with you, Mario." The mood in the pilot's locker room at El Toro was serious, pensive. Captain Stephen Hiller strolled in and noticed most of the men were sitting by themselves or huddled in quiet, brooding conversations. Turning a corner, he found his squad in a very different mood. The men of the 23rd Tactical Air Wing were relaxing in groups, talking, flipping through magazines, kidding around. The Black Knights, the squad's official nickname, was emblazoned on lockers, t-shirts, and jackets. There were even a couple of tattoos. Steve's flight partner and best friend, Jimmy Franklin, was kicked back with his feet up on a locker door, arms behind his head, listening to a portable radio. Without turning around, he knew Steve had come in. The two of them had spent so much time training and watching each other's backs, both in the air and on the ground, they automatically knew where the other one was. "Where the hell you been, Captain?" Jimmy called out. "Wait, don't tell me. Traffic was a bitch, right?" Steve dropped his bag in front of his locker and moved into the group of leathernecks. "I bet you guys have been sitting on your butts all day waiting for me to get here, right?" Steve asked facetiously, knowing the group have spent all day running through one emergency drill after another. The Marines responded by pelting Steve with half a dozen towels. Grinning, Steve strolled back to his own locker. Jimmy got up and followed him. "This is some real serious shit, Stevie. Mucho serious. They've recalled everybody on the base, and we spent the whole day on yellow alert." Steve opened his locker and saw the mail had been delivered, stuffed through the vent. He flipped through the stack until he came to a legal-sized envelope with the blue NASA insignia printed on one corner. He picked it out of the pile like a negative out of developing fluid and tossed the others aside. He stared at it for a moment before handing it to Jimmy. "You open it for me. I can't. You're turning into a real wuss, you know that?" If Stephen Hiller was the most talented and hard-working pilot on the base, Jimmy Franklin was the most fearless. Nothing scared him, and he'd prove it to you any time you liked. He tore the letter open and read it aloud so only Steve could hear. It says here, "Dear Captain Hiller, Marine Corps, blah, blah, blah. We regret to inform you that despite your excellent record service..." Jimmy's voice trailed off. He knew the news would knock the wind out of his pal. "Listen, buddy boy. I've told you this before. It don't matter that you've learned to fly everything from an Apache to a Harrier to a dang hang glider. If you want to fly the space shuttle, you're gonna have to learn to kiss a little ass." This was the third time they'd turned him down. Disgusted, Steve reached into his locker and ripped down a glossy photo of the Space Shuttle Columbia landing at Edwards AFB. Hanging right beside it was a snapshot he'd taken of Jasmine. Jimmy made it his job to cheer Steve up. "Let me explain my personal technique. The first thing is to get the ass-kissing height. When I see a general coming, I get down on one knee, see? This puts me at a perfect level with the ass that needs kissing." Steve felt like he'd just swallowed a dagger, but he tried to look amused. As he stuffed his jacket into his locker, something fell out of the pocket and onto the floor. Before Steve could grab it, Jimmy snatched it up. It was a small jewelry box, which Jimmy immediately opened. Inside there was a beautiful diamond engagement ring. The sparkling white stone was set in a gold band shaped like a dolphin jumping out of the water. For the first time in many weeks, Jimmy was rendered speechless. "Jasmine has this thing for dolphins," Steve told him, a little embarrassed. Is this a wedding ring?" Jimmy asked, still on his knees. "Engagement." Steve heard an edge of accusation in his friend's voice. They'd talked many times about Steve's goal of flying the shuttle into space, and every time they did, Jimmy gave him the same advice. "Dump the stripper." "I thought you were going to break it off, man," Jimmy growled. Just then, some guys from another flight team walked by. They saw Jimmy down on one knee, holding out an engagement ring to Captain Hiller. A couple of them did a double take. Realizing how queer it must look, Jimmy and Steve jumped away from one another in a panic. Steve snatched the box back and put it away. "Steve, listen to me. Them boys at NASA are real careful about their public image. They want everything to be wholesome, all-American apple pie. You've already made one mistake, being born black. If you go ahead and marry a stripper, you will never in a million years get to fly that shuttle. And you know I'm right." Steve knew it was all true. As soon as Jasmine signed in at the guardhouse as his overnight guest, his hopes of flying the shuttle would probably die forever. He pressed his head against a row of lockers, the metal cool against his forehead. The powerful Klieg lights that would normally have been shining on the White House were blacked out for security reasons. A pair of tanks and a platoon of rifle-bearing Marines were posted at the front gates on brightly lit Pennsylvania Avenue. Hundreds of Washingtonians were there with them. Along with the reporters and those who were simply too nervous to sleep, were small groups holding candlelit prayer vigils. A bunch of militant pacifists paraded back and forth holding signs with slogans such as "Don't provoke" and "Violence begets violence." The police, uniformed in plain clothes, were everywhere. When a pair of cops pulled a roadblock aside to allow a line of news vehicles onto the street, Julius cut into the line and drove past the roadblock like he was Walter Cronkite. Even after years of studying him, David couldn't tell when his father was being sneaky and when he was simply blundering along. When Valiant lurched to a stop, Julius turned and dryly addressed his son. "Okay, we're here. You want to ring the doorbell, or should I?" David shot his father a Clint Eastwood stare as he flipped open his cellular phone and dialed Connie's number from his computer screen. He got a busy signal. Perfect, she's on the phone right now. Sometimes David made no sense. "How?" his father wanted to know. "Can it be perfect if you need to talk to a person and her line is busy?" "Because," David explained, his fingers issuing commands across the keyboard, "I have a service that allows me to triangulate her signal and establish her exact position, even inside the White House." Julius started to say something else, then stopped short, realizing what David had said. "You can do that?" he asked, honestly curious. David answered with a diabolical grin. "All cable repairmen can." Inside the White House, Connie was in one of the hallways taking care of some personal business. She had called her friend and neighbor, Pilar, who was just about to leave for her parents' place in New Jersey. The woman promised to take Connie's cat, Thumper, with her. As soon as the two of them said goodbye, the phone rang again. "Yes?" "Connie, don't hang up." Her eyes rolled toward the ceiling when she heard David's voice. She leaned against the wall. "How did you get this number?" "Walk to the window. There should be a window right in front of you." Reluctantly, she looked around. Sure enough, there was a window only a few feet away. She walked over to the tall windows and pulled back the white lace curtains to peer outside. "All right, I'm at the window. Now what am I looking for?" There was no need for more explanation. As soon as Connie looked up at the street, she saw a tall, awkward figure climb up onto the hood of an old blue car and start waving wildly in the air. Secret Service men quickly surrounded the car and helped David down. Filtered through the phone, Connie could hear him telling the men he was talking to someone inside the White House. A moment later, an all-business voice came on the line. "Who is this?" Connie identified herself and, despite her own doubts, assured the agent that the man on the hood of the car wasn't a lunatic. She checked her watch and decided she could come down and talk to him for a minute or two.